Hello, everyone, and welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast. I'm Kevin Olenick. You can add me as a friend on Facebook, Kevin Olenick. You can follow me on Twitter at KEVOLE. Find all my podcasts on Spreaker.com at KEVOLE. You can subscribe to Agree or Disagree, the podcast on iTunes by searching Agree or Disagree, the podcast. There's a good-looking guy with some glasses and a microphone. That's me. And as well, subscribe on YouTube. Kevin Olenick. So a column came out earlier this week. Well, there was actually a couple of columns that came out that have caused a little bit of a conversation. We're not going to get into the one that caused the fire today, but we are going to get into the one that got a bit of an interesting conversation going in the Calgary Herald from Kerry Cundall, discussing the need for more charter schools. It started by saying for over 2 decades, charter schools have been providing Albertans with a school option that's fully funded for parents and delivers great results for students. Evidence shows charter schools, autonomous, government-funded, non-profit public schools, which charge no tuition, each offering a unique approach, are increasingly in demand, and their test scores are top of the pack. Education isn't one size fits all, and charter schools offer unique outreach to many Alberta kids. It's time more families had the option. It has caused a bit of a debate on both sides of the ledger. When I posted on this on Facebook, it was pretty close to a 50-50 split if there should be more charter schools. And it's caused also a conversation on social media that I decided that we needed to have a debate. And it is called Agree or Disagree, the podcast. So more often than not, we should have both sides of the ledger come together and debate. And this is what we are going to do. We are going to debate the value of charter schools. So joining us today, back again, is Barb Silva from Support Our Students. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on again. It's been a long time. I say that sarcastically.
It has. I'm a one-trick pony, so I'm an easy reach, yeah.
It's a valuable one trick, though. And also with us is Man About Town in Edmonton, Alberta, theater extraordinaire, Twitter extraordinaire. Donal O Beirne is with us. How are you?
Good, Kevin. How are you?
Good. How did I do?
Pretty close, man. You're pretty close. Donal O Beirne. Pretty close.
Okay. There. Yeah. It's been worse. It has been worse.
It's been way worse.
There is growth when. So basically, I'm going to start by saying this. I'm going to start with what I put in. More kids should agree or disagree. Should more kids have access to charter schools? And I'm going to let you guys start, and we'll build from there.
I'll let Jen go.
A long pause and trying to be polite. Right?
I'm afraid if I start, we won't stop. So I'll let Donal go first.
All right. The question: should more kids have access to charter schools? Yeah, they should, simply because Alberta artificially restricts the number of charter schools that are available. And in doing so, it actually decreases the ability to push out the learnings, the pedagogical learnings of charter schools into the broader education system. It keeps the learnings of charter schools so artificially restricted. They're a small niche market right now, and they don't have the ability to deliver on the concepts that they should be delivering back to public education.
So I'm going to say that we need to really focus on the fact that charter schools are existing under the public umbrella, and that any school that can restrict access, can deny students access, is not really a public school. And so if we're going to talk about accessibility, what we should be talking about is what we can provide all students that's free of a registration process, a 4-step process, a 7-year wait list, interview, fees. And so what what we need to do really is discuss why charter schools came into effect, what was their original purpose for implementation, and then see whether or not that's actually been successful. So I don't think the solution is to increase inequity and decrease access. I think the goal would be to say, let's make comprehensive music and language and science available to all children across this province, as opposed to concentrating them in the 2 urban centers.
If you have a response, go ahead.
Oh, well, it's a nice thought to say that. Wow, I don't really have a response structure for that one yet. It was a very nice, comprehensive answer for Barb.
Great.
She drops the mic.
I got no. Your position is this. I don't know if we want to get into a nickel and dime on every single aspect of charter schools in the first 10 seconds. So we'll see where this goes.
Okay, so let's unpack what you're saying there. But Barb, maybe from your perspective, tell us what you were seeing from the history of charter schools. And
so charter schools were born. Alberta didn't set up their education system in a vacuum. It happened in Alberta as it did in the U.S., as it did in New Zealand, as it was happening in the U.K. in 1994, in an environment of undermining and underfunding of public education in the Klein era. So it was an austerity measure, and it was meant to dilute the power of public and slowly shift us towards a private system. And charter schools, while they might not be private, and we have a very poor definition of private, we tend to think that it's just the transfer of money or perhaps just paying a tuition. But the ability of a school to exclude children to where the choice lies with the school inevitably excludes our most marginalized children. So children in poverty, children of color, children of varying abilities, First Nations children. And so, our position, and especially our position with SOS, is that that's not something that serves a public good and certainly shouldn't be funded by a public service. And I think that it's really important to recognize that this is the marketization of education, is to have this perceived idea that you are going to fill a certain niche. And so, in the same way that Apple will slow down an iPhone 6 operating system to create a need for something new in a new market, that's exactly what happened in education. And if we look at some of the charter schools, like, for example, Foundations for the Future, which I don't think that it's necessarily innovative, and it's not research-based in the way that charter schools were meant to be implemented. It's very much a traditional type of school whose mission is to provide a safe and caring environment where academic excellence, character development, parental involvement, and staff leadership are valued and fostered. I don't know how that makes it different from any public school that we should be promoting. So, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I think it's really important to understand that charter schools are part of a marketization movement. And that's, marketization means some people get it and some people don't.
Okay, with all due respect, Barb, if you're going to say that you don't know how Foundation for the Future is different from a regular school, shouldn't you know that if you're going to object to the structure of the school in place?
No, what I'm saying is I don't know what's innovative. I don't know. What I'm saying is it's a ruse. It's a guise as being something special.
Okay, so there's 15 charter schools in Alberta, and there's only 15, right?
There was 13.
13, right? Sorry, but there can only be a max. You're correct. You're only a max of 15, right? Most of them are in Calgary. There's a few up here at Edmonton, right? One of the ones
6 and 6. Yeah.
One of the ones we have up here is the Suzuki Charter School.
Correct.
Right. So it's a Suzuki educational method focused on music, not something that has ever been made available in the Edmonton public or the Edmonton Catholic systems. So why is this such a bad thing to have a charter school that can deliver that program?
So a couple of things, a couple of reasons that I would take issue with any of these schools, and
no, let's not go with that with any of these schools. We're talking about one specific.
I'll get to Suzuki. I mean, Suzuki is a school. Ultimately, the choice lies with that school, right? Correct. Number one. Number two, all students, as based on their website at Suzuki, are required to attend regular individual music lessons with a Suzuki-trained teacher. I mean, that sounds like a racket for a business. And so you automatically exclude people from an economic level who can afford private Suzuki trained music lessons. And that is totally fine if you want to do that outside of the public system, but let's not pretend that that's public education that's equitable and accessible to all children. There's this misguided belief that charter schools are doing something so amazing that we never achieved before. Did we never have musicians before Suzuki Charter School? Are Foundations for the Future turning out engineers Alberta's a place that was the foundation for fracking, for horizontal drilling, for the ability to extract oil from oil sands. And all of that technology was born from engineers, geologists, who came out of a system when charters didn't exist. So the idea that they're doing something spectacular is not proven. And the research worldwide around charter schools and private schools is that any benefit that they provide is a direct association to those families' socioeconomic status. And so we are benefiting and disguising benefit as, exclusivity.
I guess my question to your point, to go back to the musician part, is my understanding is even in public schools, so and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there are musicians, actors, people in the arts industry that do get some sort of separate, special tutoring because they see an ability for them to go further in life with that talent. When I hear what the Suzuki is doing, my instant reaction is, isn't that sort of a mentorship program, and is that not helping that student go further?
So the argument from our perspective is never that the programs are bad. I don't think no one would argue that these programs are bad. Our concern with them is that they're exclusive. And so when they're exclusive and then they are subsidized by the public dollar, then to us it's no longer a public service. That, for me, that's the issue, is the fact that we have found these ways to exclude certain parts of the population, and those certain parts of the population, by and large, tend to be kids in poverty. It tends to be kids of color. It tends to be new immigrants. It tends to be kids with disabilities. And that is not the purpose of public education.
But we already have exclusions in public education as it is. And since we're talking about the arts, we'll talk about Victoria School of the Arts here at Edmonton. Vic, you have to audition to get in. You have to have some level of skill in being a performer to get in. There's no messing around. It's a great school. I'd love for my daughter to go there. And we've evaluated sending her there, but when you're trying to develop programs that focus on so academically gifted students or students with talent of performing and music, you're going to have exclusions anyway, whether or not, in this case of the Suzuki system, they have to be, get training through Suzuki method teachers for music, which makes sense given that it's all tied together. You're still going to be excluded. It's not like, you can just walk up with no talent and go into an art school, right? It's not like you can walk into, a hockey academy and start going to school there if you're really not a hockey academy student, if you're not a hockey player. So we already have that in the public system and in the separate system. But I know the argument in this case is that, we'd say in this case that separate and public are for the argument, both public. I know you will disagree with that, Barb.
That's what I have to say. Awesome.
But just for the purpose of the charter school, we already have exclusions across the board.
But I'm going to argue that charter schools introduced that exclusion. I'm here to say that the introduction of charter schools was brought in for that very purpose.
No,
as a marketized education. We didn't have Victoria School of the Arts before 1994. We didn't have it to the degree. We didn't have this proliferation of boutique programming before charter schools. We didn't have this illusion.
One size fits all. We had one size fits all. There was a demand. There's always been a demand for more programming. And now
then you don't really understand how marketization works, because marketization works where you create a demand. The demand isn't there on its own. Everybody would be happy with their iPhone 6. Most people probably only use about 13% or 15% of its capability. But you create a market, and you create a market for an iPhone 8 by slowing down the operation of an iPhone 6, right? You tell people they need more data, you need something faster, you need a better camera. And that's how you marketize it. And that happened in a time, Klein era, where the government was trying to divest itself of these public services and in an attempt to privatize it. And the easiest way to disguise it for that 96% of the population who is in the public system is to sell them that they need this. You need a different way to learn. And the truth is you don't, because somehow prior to 1994, and I'd actually say prior to 2006, when even if that was the first cohort of 12 years of charter schools, we managed to produce world-class engineers, and we managed to have, world-class musicians. We managed to have world-class art.
We managed to have arts programming in some schools, but right. There's a difference between a school focused on the arts, where there's demand and the need. The kids can excel on this programming, against just going to your school and doing your Christmas concert, which is really what a lot of the arts programming was, especially in primary years for the for theater.
And
across the board.
So I would suggest that the solution then is to give all children access to amazing arts curriculum and amazing language curriculum within the public system, as opposed to creating schools that have. So do you think anyone who goes to an elite private school like Weber or Strathcona chooses between an amazing arts program or an amazing language program or why did those kids never have to choose?
Yeah, now you're those aren't charter schools. Now you're changing you're making a jump there.
But I'm saying it's possible. That type of school that offers that type of programming is possible. We make it exclusive to certain parts of our population, but it's possible. It's possible to have a school that has an amazing arts program with an arts focused teacher. It's possible to have language in every other country.
But you're talking about A schools, and now you're listing off single schools, and you're comparing them to a whole education system. In order to make your premise work, you're going to have it work in every school, where every school will have to have an immersive second language program, an effective arts programming, an effective technology base, and how
Finland does it.
Pick an elementary school and say, okay, I want to have my kid going to my neighborhood elementary school, and I want my kid to be involved in a golf program or a hockey program. I also want them to have a theater. How big are these schools going to be in order to make that? I don't get the logistics of it.
So, but here's the thing. Here's the thing: is that those are all ways in which exclusivity and people with advantages envision something. But what I'm saying is, other countries do this. Finland is a very good example of having schools that have comprehensive programs. First of all, the fact that we think immersion works has been proven not true. So we have not substantially or actually in any way increased rates of bilingualism in Canada through French immersion. Hasn't worked. Countries like Finland, who also is a country with 2 official languages, teach all children in both official languages until they're 9 and then introduce a 3rd language. And they do that across the board. It's possible. They also have comprehensive music programs. They also have comprehensive physical education programs. The minute you start saying, my kid has to have a hockey program, well, you're going to end up with a homogeneous group of people there. And to me, that is a danger further down the road for our society, to silo children by race or culture or socioeconomic status or ability.
Okay, you took a pretty big leap there to make that connection, I think. You tied together siloing kids by race, just to say what you said, that a hockey academy essentially leads to siloing kids by race.
I'm talking about all of these components. I mean, do you not think when we have a school just for Jewish kids or just for Muslim kids, that there are some components there where they're not interacting with other races or cultures? I used one example, but I don't know a lot of Somali kids or Syrian kids who are going to the hockey academy. I mean, we might not want to talk about this because it makes us uncomfortable, but that's the reality. If you look at Foundations for the Future Charter Academy, their application program is offered in Chinese and English. That's a marketing ploy. I don't. This is the result: is that you market to a certain demographic, and then you choose. The school chooses you. You apply, but the school chooses you.
Right, and okay, that's all right. That's a fair point. The school has a targeted education mandate, including, for example, a hockey program. And I would actually argue that, for example, that the hockey program it opens up hockey programming to kids who might not be able to afford league programming, right? To be able to play in a hockey league outside of school, because
the Warner Academy charges $30,000 a year for the hockey program. Who's that opening it up to?
The which academy?
The Warner Academy charged $30,000 for the exclusive hockey program.
Do they have scholarships?
Wait, are they a charter school?
They're they're in a small rural community. So
okay.
So these alternative programs, and this is another component to something that the charter schools, brought into. Although charter schools are not allowed to charge fees, which is again a way to disguise exclusivity. But it did introduce alternative programs as a competition response, and alternative programs with the public system can charge thousands of dollars in fees. So again, I'm not saying the programming is bad. What we're trying to return to is universality and making sure that all children have access to these programs, and to try to sell it, this ruse, this sort of amazing marketing strategy of that choice is the best. I don't know why children should have to choose between a great music program and a great language program. They shouldn't have to choose, and we can make that happen if we decide that that's the focus of public education.
So how would you go about implementing a grade, for example, in the same school, a great music program and a great hockey program in the same school?
So again, this is
yeah, like how would you go about doing that, right? We have schools here in Edmonton which are hockey academies. The Catholic system runs a great one, right by my kid's school, as a matter of fact. How are you going to integrate that with a world-class music program for the same students?
So you have to have a vision. It's certainly not going to happen immediately, right? I mean, Finland did this. It took them 40 years. First of all,
hang on. Let's be clear. Finland's a country, right? We're not talking about a national education program. We're talking about a provincial education program, right? We can't. It's just like comparing. It's just like comparing, Norway's oil revenues to Alberta.
And you can find a whole bunch of reasons to avoid trying something new. But the reality is, the system we have was built on other countries' systems, was built on the American system. We did exactly what the Americans did. Why did no one say in 1994, why are you building charter schools? We're not like the States. Why are we not saying, why are we following the UK model of competition? We're nothing like the UK. Why is it that when, we implement any other marketization system, we don't say we're not like another country? We manage to do that just fine when we want to follow a competition-based model. What I'm saying is take components of places that we see work. And what's worked in other places was to go back to how we train teachers, teach them with specialization, get them to have, master's levels training mandatory, build schools with the proper facilities, wraparound facilities that make them community hubs. So build schools with recreational facilities built in, with an adequate stage built in. And we have pockets of that exist, not to the extent that we would like it. And then have schools that have proper wraparound services from other communities. That means also having healthcare provisions made to meet kids' needs at school. And when you have teachers who are trained, specialized in their area of expertise, that can happen. And when we pool our resources, that's literally why we pool our resources. That's literally why we do taxes, because our dollars together can buy more, can acquire more, then we can absolutely make that happen.
So what's stopping a school board from doing that now? Can't the school board just say, listen, teachers, you got to have masters to teach it?
Well, you don't, because they have the degree, and that's how we That's how we train our teachers. Our teachers are not trained right now as a math specialist or a physics specialist or a music specialist.
Right, but why can't a school board just take that mandate on and say, great, every Calgary Public, we're going to do it?
To some degree they could, but the problem is right now is the funding model means the more students you get, the more money you get, and they're currently underfunded, and so they're fighting for scraps. It's very difficult to be picky and start doing something that costs you more money when you barely have enough money to begin with. I mean, it's champagne taste on a beer budget.
Right, and with champagne taste on a beer budget, we have found a system that works. We have programming that delivers across the board for the people who want it.
Who's it working for? Because we hear people constantly coming to us every single day being streamed academically, who are being counseled out of programs that are deemed academic, who've been on a wait list for 7 to 10 years. This idea that these children need this, my child needs this special program. How do you know what your child's going to need 7 to 10 years in advance? Well, who's getting on a wait list as soon as their child has a birth certificate, which is recommended off the Foundations for the Future Charter Academy? Who has the ability to go through a 5-step process and then wait for a school to choose them? This is okay. All these things are okay outside of the public system. If this wants to exist outside of the public system, absolutely. But universality has to be the foundation for public service. For the very same reason that I can't dictate that a transit bus should come and pick me up at my house and take me directly to my work because I need this, because I need a bus with only this route and only comes at this times because that's better for me. I don't get to dictate that.
You're right, but you could take more than what you can not. You can also drive your car, and you can also take other forms of public or semi-public traffic.
But I don't expect the government to pay for my drive. I don't expect the government.
But the government funds. Its government's still going to pay for the road.
That's a different story.
It's the same general argument, right? It's not like if I call up an Uber, I have to take a private road.
Yeah, but those are two totally different pots. I mean, you pay for infrastructure differently. I'm saying, ask for a road that goes directly point A to point B, the way the crow flies. You have to take the road that was built out of communal good. But then everyone travels on it. That serves everyone.
You're right. And we're still building these out of the communal good.
But they're inaccessible. I mean, if you have to go to interviews, if the final say is with the school, then it's inaccessible for the people who most need public education. If we remember what public education is truly for, and if we realize that if we build a system based around our most marginalized kids, I'm talking 1 in 6 Alberta children live in poverty. We have not changed that in 25 years.
You're right. Absolute problem.
We have not altered in any significant way our completion rates at high schools.
I don't think that's entirely true. Look at the outcomes for Edmonton Catholic. They've got their FNMI graduation rates are climbing significantly.
On the scale of the entire province, we have not greatly altered.
Well, as
it would not be attributed to the presence of a music school or a hockey school or a direct instruction.
But they have these Edmonton Public and Edmonton Catholic both have competitive programs like that designed to get people, designed to drive academics and to drive outcomes. That's what it's for. It's to get people to choose to come to their schools. And as a result, Edmonton Catholic is now able to increase the number of increase graduation rate for Indigenous kids finishing high school. So there are successes. Now, if you want to argue, take the Edmonton Catholic model, run it across the province, see if it succeeds. Great, I'm all for that. I think they have a great program. I think Edmonton Public has a phenomenal program too. But we have multiple school boards, all with different competencies and different priorities. So,
I want to reiterate: I don't think the programming is bad. We come from a perspective of equity and universality of access to it. So that, for us, is the defining factor. Is how accessible it is. And we hear time and time again from people who are turned away from these programs, for people who feel that there's academic streaming involved, that they, that's a concern for us. And the idea, and this is often, and you will have actually never, ever, ever heard anyone from SOS, myself included, advocate for a one-size-fits-all. That is not what we're saying at all. And we never have said that. That's a way of sort of minimizing the...
Well, but your whole concept is that one size, that you can build a system where one size does fit all. You compared it to, well, that's certainly what I got from what you said from talking about the overseas, from Finland and from Finland, right? I think we got where we were talking about, right? Was that they have programming where it's available to all students, and it essentially makes every school system one size fits all. That every student has access to, two primary languages and a third language going all the way through, so language programming all the way through. They have access to the same quality, high quality music program.
This sounds terrible. No, what I'm saying though is that access to that curriculum is universal, but that doesn't mean a school cannot reflect the needs of its community. It doesn't mean that the teacher in Hannah is not going to discuss things that reflect her community or his community in a way that's different than someone in Fort McMurray. Schools can still have autonomy. Schools can still reflect the needs of their community, but we don't need to pretend that some kids, we have to put all the music kids in one school and all the kids who are high athletes in another school and restrict their ability to learn across those capabilities. There's no need for one child not be able to sit beside a gifted student and a hearing impaired student and a kid with a music gift and an athletic gift and a language gift and not learn across those differences.
So then how do you do that in the current structure that we have in place? Or do we have to completely change the way we fund and deliver educational programming?
B. Your second. We have
wholesale just change, and what's it going to cost? There is a cost question to all this. How do you propose to fund that level of cross programming available in essentially every school?
Well, it's entirely possible if we alter the funding model. One, which means we would suggest a two-part funding so that schools have operational costs that are not attached to the per student cost. You have to pay for light, you have to pay for heating, you have to pay for things in a part of a school regardless of the population of the school, right? Those are sunken operational costs. Those should be separate from the per student funding. Secondly, a lot of these students, there's a lot of students in the system right now who have a need for services that actually overlap with child services and overlap with Alberta Health Services. And the current way that we compartmentalize this funding is hurting students, right? So the fact that you've got to go and take time off of work, if you're able to take your kid to the dentist or to the psychologist or to the social worker, those services, if they overlap within the system, would also complement that funding. So sometimes it doesn't cost you more, you just have to spend it better, right? We have to find ways to spend it better. Certainly diverting money to charter schools and private schools the way that we do in Alberta undermines that process.
How much though? How much is it undermining? These are 13 schools? How many students? What are we talking about here?
Well, I don't, because we don't collect that data, I can't tell you. What I can
Well, we don't, but we know what per student funding is, and I'm sure you know how many kids are at those schools.
Yeah, I mean
so how much? What's the cost? What cost? How are we hurting kids by funding these schools? And how much money would go back into the system if we were to shut down arbitrarily all 13 schools?
So here's the problem with what you're asking, and
it seems like what's the problem? I want to know how much money we're going to save. How much money is made available to the
hundreds of millions?
Are you guessing? Because I don't know.
Well, I don't have the number. I don't have the number, but I know it's at least hundreds of millions, and I know that schools lease the buildings from the CBE for $1 a year. So we're highly subsidizing that. That's money that's coming out of the CBE. That's money that the CBE has to operate and maintain those buildings for charter schools. That's coming away from public schools. That I know. I know that they lease those schools for $1 a year. Why do they get subsidized buildings at the expenses of kids who are going to the regular community school?
But don't they have to pay for maintenance and upgrade out of their per student budget, just like every other school?
It's CBE schools. It's a CBE property. That's off the backs of the CBE.
Right, but then they still get their per student. They still have to pay for maintenance. I know at my daughter's school, they have to pay for all the maintenance, even though it's an Edmonton Catholic school. Right, it comes out of some of their per student funding.
And those are different agreements. And I will say that I am not concerned, and I have at no point mentioned the financial cost, because I'm not looking for a deal when it comes to public education. I will be the first
to pay for it. We still have to. I just want to know. One of the arguments that's put forward all the time is that these schools are diverting essential funds, and I just want someone to tell me.
But that's not my argument. You'll find someone who has that argument. That's not my argument. My argument is that it's creating inequity, and it's moving us away from universality, and that it's purposefully doing so to create an environment that widens inequity, that keeps privilege with privilege, that makes it more difficult for people who are disadvantaged to achieve the same educational outcomes. That's our argument. Our argument is based in equity and universality. Are there economic factors to it? Absolutely. That is not the basis of our argument. I'm not looking for a deal in education. I think we currently spend about $9,000 in per student funding. I think we should be spending $15,000 to do what SOS's dream is. And I think it's possible.
So you brought up, one of the things you brought up was students in poverty, and it's an interesting discussion up at Edmonton here. And really, I can only argue from the Edmonton perspective, because this is where I live. I haven't ever raised kids in Calgary. So I'm a little light on Calgary policy area. We have the Boyle Street Education Center, which is a program designed to help integrate children, mainly Indigenous kids, who have dropped out of standard programming, and to get them back in and to get them their degree. Right? It's got a small student base. It has specific targeted programming. It's a charter school. Now, the demand is low. They do have a cap on their students, but perhaps the demand could be higher. Why is this not run in the public system, the Edmonton public or the Edmonton Catholic? Why is there no demand for it? Why do it has to be run through a charter at all?
So I'll go to the root of the problem there, and what public education advocates like us are trying to say is, supply. You're talking about supply and demand. What we'd look at is, why is there a supply? Why are there a disproportionate amount of First Nations kids dropping out? That's the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is, how are we serving that? The problem that we should be looking at in education is, why are there a disproportionate amount of kids in poverty or First Nations kids dropping out? How do we solve that problem? Not how do we provide more solutions to the problem, but how do we look at education and say, why are these kids' needs not being met? Because they feel marginalized, because their needs within the public system need more resources, because we need a curriculum that reflects them, because we need instruction that makes them feel included and a part of the community. And maybe if we solve the source of the problem, we won't need that demand. And so part of the solution in the immediate might be that, but we are trying to solve these problems with a bigger vision, rooted in equity, rooted in universality, that would eliminate these problems. And we don't see any effort currently going towards that.
There wasn't any effort either before the program was put in place. School was established in 95, 96. Right? There was a demand because it wasn't being met in Edmonton Public or Edmonton Catholic for that matter. So it wasn't being met before a group that recognized a hole in the system filled it with a charter. I would argue that the charter school is trying to address exactly that, address the inequity that exists, and to at least, if we can't solve FNMI poverty and the issue, and they are systemic and they are massive in Canada, and it's something we should all focus on. Absolutely. I mean, just as a side note, I would love to see every child in Canada be required to take Indigenous language programming. In fact, as a second language over French or English, depending on where you live. That's just me.
I don't disagree with you. But I think saying that it's not possible absolves us of any responsibility.
I didn't say it was possible. I said it wasn't done. It wasn't. There was a demand to do this, and there was an obvious market for it. And given the successes of the program, I'd say there was a high demand for it, and yet it wasn't done. And why wasn't it done? It was done because there was a monopolistic, fairly monopolistic education system.
I'd say it wasn't done, in this specific case for the same reason it's never done, because we overlook the needs of our First Nations people. Because when you sell charter schools, and one of them, a very small one, fits this need for First Nations kids, but you overlap it and overarch it with a Suzuki Music School, and you overlap it with a Connect Science charter school where every child gets an iPad, people are willing to overlook it if they can advance meeting the needs of their own children. And that's where the inequity is. That's where public education should not go. And the fact that we didn't do it before, or it wasn't done before, for us, is not an excuse to not do it now.
It wasn't done before. There was no demand in the system. There was no motivation for the school system to set it up because they had no reason to. Right? They weren't going to be forced to do it by the education department. They certainly were going to be forced to do it by their own school board. Right? There was
also no funding for it. Again, I will go back to, if you want to talk about a market and demand type system, which I cannot, for me, from a perspective of public service, has no place in public service. But if you want to go there, a major part of the problem is that the same iPhone strategy. You slow down the public system, and you underfund the public system, and you undermine teachers, and you undermine curriculum for the purpose of creating this market. So the fact that there was no market and there was no demand, it was created. It's created.
So Ralph Klein got elected in 94. Before that, it was Premier Getty. So if the premise of this is that 2 years in education cuts, or a year in education cuts under Premier Klein, drove setting up, for example, the Boyle Street Education Center, because there was, it was all fine before that. In a 1 year change, I find that premise implausible.
Why?
There was a monopolistic system is not going to make outside scope changes if it doesn't need to.
It's not a monopoly. It's not a business. It's not a business. That, to me, is the inherent problem in the argument. It's not a business. It's not a commodity. You're not buying anything. Children have a right to a rich and comprehensive education.
Agreed. And we have a system now that delivers that.
For some.
If you can attend the public system and show that you have the skills to attend a hockey academy, you can attend it.
You cannot attend it. There are barriers. We speak to people every single day who were counseled out of going to language programs because their children have behavioral issues, because their children speak another language at home, because these children have autism or Asperger's, and they are told these are too academic for you. We now have schools that are deemed too academic. These schools prohibit people from, if it's a 7-year wait list, how many people know about that? Why are gifted schools I don't know how many kids you have. I have more than 2 kids, and they are all very different. The chances of all 3 of my kids testing gifted is, I don't really know what the odds of that are. And yet, some of these, I couldn't. I'm not going to.
Yeah, we want to say, yes, all 3 of them are, but no.
But you would be surprised at how, at Westmount Charter, which is for gifted children who requires private testing to be done, psychoed testing, those evaluations cost $2,000 to do, how many siblings get priority and how many families are in that system. All 4 children testing gifted. I'm not sure that I buy that. I'm not sure that when the schools are allowed to choose, they don't choose homogeneous populations. Whatever that homogeneity is, whether it's religion or ability, and I think it's exclusive. I think there are poor children who are also gifted. I think there are kids who don't speak English well who are also gifted, who also deserve the opportunity to have themselves challenged in the environment in which they find themselves, whatever school that is. But that it should be public and it should be universal. We pretend that it's universally accessible because I think it makes us feel better, but it is not. And talk to people for whom it's marginalizing. They will tell you that it's not equitably accessible.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I mean, Donal, you mentioned that you wanted to put your daughter in the Victoria school. You considered it, but you
she could have gone. There was no question she could have gone. There was there's always family factors and other things. That was just an unrelated. It's not related to my daughter or the school why she's not going there.
But Barb's point, I see where I think what Barb is saying is that there's other kids that we don't label in that. We could have a separate conversation about this term gifted, and maybe it's an important conversation to have in all of this. But there are a lot of kids that can't fit within that category of gifted, talented, showing some sort of potential, however you want to word that. They're being missed out on that. So how can charter schools help with that specifically?
How can it? Sorry, I'm trying to understand.
How does it, if I had a kid and I'm poor, dirt poor, because I'm a podcaster, how am I possibly going to have my kid get into that school?
Get into a charter school?
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm not trying to put my kids in a charter school.
Okay, but isn't that
a charter school? Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry, but isn't that speaking to what Barb is kind of saying? Is that it is causing a limitation to other potential options for education?
It's causing. Okay.
Am I wording what you're saying, Barb, right?
I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying, Kevin. So just bear with me on this.
Sure.
For an academic, academic kids who are not able to pay for the test, for example, to get into Westmont. I don't know if that's true or not. I trust Barb when she says it is. That they would not be able to attend Westmont.
Right. So how's that helping develop that child that can't afford to go to a charter school because they're technically, we've labeled them somehow gifted? How, if I think what Barb's point is that the charter school is kind of, in a sense, the way that it's operating from her perspective is there's a marginalization in a if one in six kids, if 1 in 6 kids in Alberta are living in poverty, then what? I mean, I'm not assuming that the other 5 are immediately affordable to get into charter schools anyway, but we certainly
it's the calling that of a public school, right? That's the problem. The problem isn't the programming. I want to say that programming is so good we should have it. We should be able to expose all kids to it. It's the exclusivity and this. We are desensitizing our population to what privatization looks like, and it's not always tuition. Okay, so the original premise under which charters were introduced was that they would be innovative and that they would share their research within the public system. They have a 5-year mandate. Every 5 years, their licenses get renewed or reviewed, and the idea was that they were innovative and that they were offering something school boards didn't. So if we look at Westmount Charter, who, of course, they don't take your word for it that your child is gifted. You have to get a psychoeducational assessment, which is a private cost, which costs around $2,000. a lot of these schools, so if they are a music school, Connect Charter School, Westmount Gifted School, Foundations for the Future, Direct Instruction School, all have had this intended effect of creating like schools under the public umbrella here in CB. So we have a GATE program, which is correlated to the Westmount. We have the Langevin Science School, which correlates to the Connect Charter. We have Focus Arts Music Schools, which are a response to Calgary Arts Academy, and we have TLC programs, which are responding to Foundations for the Future. So and I'm going to make the argument, crazy enough, in favor of charter schools based on the legislation under which they were introduced, that if they actually did result in these programs being offered in the public system, at a 5-year renewal, their licenses should not be renewed. They are no longer providing something that is not accessible in the public system. They should either be rolled in to the school board so that they now not just privately run, but respond to an elected school board, that they cannot turn away students, and that they participate fully under the public umbrella.
I agree with you.
So then we don't need them. Because if we are going to go based on the legislation that exists today, the premise under which they were introduced, they all have correlated schools introduced under the public umbrella, there's no need for them anymore.
I don't know. I don't know that that's actually true.
But that's based on the legislation. I'm not asking for opinion. The School Act says that they have to have independent research supporting these proposed charter schools programs. The charter school regulation says they explain how the program to be offered by the charter school is significantly different from programs offered by the board. So the moment you have programs offered by the board that are a direct response to these charter schools, they no longer meet this requirement. So for me, it's not an opinion. If 5 years have gone by and the school board has responded with programs in kind, they should not have their licenses reviewed. They're not serving the initial purpose.
Okay, so I'll use Calgary or Edmonton. I don't know of a single school board here that teaches the Suzuki method.
Well, that sounds like a business to me. I also don't know a school that runs the Encana way of manufacturing engineers.
God, we had a lot more pipelines. We had that.
I don't know a Google school that teaches coding. Right? I don't know a Google school that teaches coding.
Right, but the Suzuki charter mandate is to teach the Suzuki method in school. So I agree. I mean, just using that example, I agree that if the school board teaches the Suzuki method in one or more of its schools or in its music programming, great, wind it down, shut it down.
Yep.
But they don't. And, and as much as the Edmonton Catholic system is doing a great job of integrating, at-risk Indigenous kids into their programming, the Boyle Street Center still needs to run. There are kids who have dropped out. They have interrupted programming. They have interrupted education. And they need special wraparound programming available for a very limited number of students. So I would argue that charter as well would need to be maintained.
I mean, I'm just going to go back and say that that we can point out one school that is trying to solve a problem when we ignore the problem, and the greater problem is that there are kids within the public system whose needs are not going met, whose needs we most need to meet. Right. The truth is, if you have the socioeconomic status and English as a first language and educated parents, you are by and large set to succeed in life, regardless of the school you go to.
I agree with you.
And that is statistically proven. There are no proven peer-reviewed documents or research that shows going to a charter or even a private school results in better academic outcomes. None. So if we know and accept that to be true, why would we continue to build a system around kids who already have advantages when we have not affected kids living in poverty, when we still know kids of color are being streamed, when we know we're not reaching FNMI kids, when kids with disability are still being locked in seclusion?
I have no problem with winding down the ones that are already having their, oh my God, let's try that again. I have no problem winding down the ones where there's boards already offering the same programming. No problem with that. I'm not going to argue with you. The mandate of a charter school is to serve certain needs, but there's always going to be niches, and also as new pedagogies come out, you're going to want to be able to try them in a way that maybe you can't roll out across the school board. Right? This is exactly what they're for.
So so like, against my better judgment, because I'm not for charter schools, I'm not for the inequity that they result, but they have never really lived up to bringing in that innovation. And the purpose was, as you're saying, to have these little pockets of research and say, let's try this, and then spread it throughout the public system.
You're right. Yep.
That's never happened. And so maybe if that happened, I might have, if these schools went then into communities where people are living in poverty and communities of lower socioeconomic status and said, we're going to share this knowledge with you, we're going to make it open to everyone, there will be no barriers to access to this type of learning environment, I might have a different opinion. But that's not the mandate though either of a charter school. Or the charter school, the mandate, it's not meant to go to a specific school in a lower socioeconomic district and say, we're going to share these specific learning with this school. You're supposed to be wound into the district. The district's supposed to do this, not the school. That was the mandate in the States, absolutely.
In the States, but I'm sitting in Edmonton.
But this did not happen in a vacuum, right? So they were supposed to share their knowledge with the public system at large. So maybe not in lower socioeconomic communities, but they were supposed to. That was the mandate of charter schools, was to be innovative, research-based, and then to share that knowledge with the public system. That absolutely was the mandate. And that's the mandate everywhere charter schools have been implemented. So if they had actually...
In Alberta. So in Alberta.
Sure, we're the only province that has it.
Right. So I just want to be sure we're not talking about a U.S. implementation of charter school. I don't want to get lost in the differences.
There is really no difference. If you want to go back to saying why we're different from other places, we didn't come up with this idea in a vacuum. Right? It was introduced in the exact same year under the exact same premise as it was in the United States.
But we did implement it here, and we have to own our own implementation of it. So I guess my question is, if why aren't the school boards taking this on?
Because
that's their job, right?
Well, it's also the ministry's job, right? I mean, when you have someone who's starving, you don't ask them why they haven't been exercising adequately.
I agree.
Right? I mean, they're constantly, most schools, CBE has $1.3 billion in deferred maintenance, right?
Yep.
They cannot even adequately bus kids to school. So They're busy putting out fires to have any real vision. I will be the first to agree with you. I think everybody involved in education has to start looking beyond how to fund next year. We need to have a vision for education. Whether you agree or disagree with my vision, whatever, but have a vision that's greater than just putting out immediate fires. But school boards are just putting out fires right now after decades of underfunding and undermining and just trying to keep the roofs from leaking. So I don't blame them for this. I think they still need a bigger vision. But in all honesty, I don't know that most people think about it in this way because we're so busy trying to meet our own individual needs and buying into this idea that these programs do a better job of educating kids, which is just not true. So it's hard to see the bigger picture, which is why SOS exists. We want people to start thinking about it. We want to challenge the status quo. We want people to question whose needs are we supposed to be meeting. Again, one of the biggest things I've learned in the last few years is intent versus impact. Sometimes we intend good things, but the impact is entirely different. And maybe the intention behind some of these schools is good, but the impact has been inequity.
So I want to ask this. I have two more questions that I would like us to discuss here. What would you say to the parents, and there were comments on my Facebook about this, and there are comments from several parents about this, that they found that their kid going to a charter school was better for them overall. That their social skills were better, they were more comfortable, and they found that they were doing better academically. What would you say to that?
Who are you asking, Kevin?
Either one of you. I mean, I'm sort of asking Barb. I think the question's more to Barb, but either one of you can answer that.
I mean, I think I would have two responses to that. One, again, I'm not saying the programming is bad, right? So I don't want to have to say, well, the programming is great, but I think there's also a perceived placebo effect, right? I think there's this idea of when you're with it's easier and it's better, but we're also robbing our children of the opportunity to learn across differences, right? So. And I use the gifted example a lot because I think it's sort of, I don't want to say it's the easiest example, but it might be the one that illustrates it the most, is that I don't know that, gifted children, when they're diagnosed gifted, often have other issues related to their giftedness. And to not give them the tools to deal with an environment that might not be full of gifted people is in itself educational. So to pull a student out and then put them in a community that is strictly gifted limits their opportunity to develop that. And then we see, and we know, we don't collect these statistics in Alberta, but we know, generally speaking, outside of Alberta, people who are tested and found gifted are disproportionately not people of color, not Latinos. They tend to come from higher socioeconomic communities and tend to be overly Caucasian. So we're creating these environments. So of course the child in that moment, because they're children, tend to feel really comfortable where they feel they're with their own peer group. But I don't know that the short-term benefits of that outweigh the long-term benefits of having children learn across differences. They're certainly not going to grow up to shop in a gifted supermarket or live in a gifted apartment building. So I don't know how much of that is placebo.
You can respond if you want as well. Yeah, I both, just like your podcast, I both agree and disagree with Barb. And that definitely the placebo effect is true, and it's also, it's the same thing of, people who are like me, I can relate to, and therefore it's easier to adapt, to fit in, to be better behaved and more comfortable. The other thing that one of the things I noticed in what Barb has been saying is that in many ways, charter schools deliver the kind of programming that I think Barb and Sabre students would like to see for every student, yes, without the streaming, right? Absolutely, yeah. Right? It essentially, in many ways, they are an idealized form of education.
Altogether, if we get programming together, right?
I'm not saying that in their current form they are ideal in every state. Yeah. I'm saying that the type of programming that they deliver is that is what you would like to see across the board, yeah, for every student.
I think that's the biggest misconception about what we're trying to say, right? It's literally the biggest misconception is that people are saying, or people construe what we're saying is that we don't like the programming. In fact, we think some of the programming is so great. We think all children should have access to it. But and this is a conversation, it's not about charter schools, but this is a conversation I just had the other day about, with a mom who said to me, there's some behavioral issues in her son's class. She's really concerned, she's in a community school. And she literally said to me, and this is what concerns me, if I had known that we were going to have to deal with these other kids and these other kids' problems, I would have put my children in French immersion because these other kids would never cut it in that program, and I wouldn't have to deal with it. That othering concerns me. That othering where we think we can take our children and silo them based on whatever component to keep them away from people who are other saddens me. And I don't think that's what public education is about. And I don't think that's what we should be spending public dollars on.
It's a tough thing. And I fully understand. Because when you have kids with higher needs in the classroom, it can impact everyone else in that classroom. And, my job is to make sure that, at one level, my daughter gets the best possible education and success in life that she can possibly have. Now, for me, that means that she's in a focused environment where she's not being distracted. For other kids, it means being able to go to school at all. So I understand, it's being able to go to school and come to school fed fed and rested and not traveling for 2 hours to get to school on a bus, or getting dropped off at after school care at 6 a.m. and picked up at 6 o'clock at night. For an hour-long trip home, because parents have to work long hours. So, to be honest with you, the sentiment that you expressed with the parent of French immersion, it really bothered me. Like I was quite bothered by the whole thing. It's a horrific sentiment, at the same time, we're still talking. I know you have made. I'm not going to jump back into it. Some pretty strong statements on French immersion, which that was certainly eye opening. French immersion does have a place, and lots of parents find it valuable for their kids, either from part of developing a linguistic background in the kids, and or they're French at home, or we have Spanish immersion, we have Chinese immersion, we have different immersion languages, and you want to, keep that going in your family. There's a place for it. Now, does that mean that some kids who are not, would not succeed in French as a second? Hell, I wouldn't succeed in a French immersion class at all. I'd fail at that horribly.
But
there's a place for it.
But those are perceptions. It's not true. We have not increased bilingualism as a result of French immersion in this nation at all. So it's a perception. We have heard teachers and principals say that it operates as a private school within the public system because they can counsel kids who are difficult to teach out of the programs. They can say this is not a fit for you. And we have to understand, are we teaching language for people to become fluent? Or are we teaching language because being exposed to language pedagogy develops neurons and pathways and intellectual growth? My kids take music not because I think they're going to play Carnegie Hall someday, but because I think exposure to music helps develop them as people. I also have them play sports not because I think they're going to become elite athletes, but because I like physical literacy. So I think it's a ruse. I think we tell ourselves these things that my kids have to and they need to be fluent in French. That is not the actual outcome. That is not achieved. And if you see the population of these schools, grade 1, you might have 100 students. By the time you get to grade 6, maybe only 60 are left because we've managed to counsel out the kids that are difficult to teach through that process. And that's, again, I think that's where the inequity and the unfairness lies. And I can see this has been successful because it plays into that parents' innate need to protect and do best for their children. But I don't think it should be a policy from a larger vision for public education.
So then how would you get an immersion language program running in schools across the board? So
I don't think you need an immersion program. Immersion doesn't work. There is no proof that immersion works. And this is not something SOS is saying. There is, for years, even Stats Canada has put out that French immersion is not having the intended effect. We can teach we have a second official language in this country. To me, there is no reason why every child in this country shouldn't be exposed to learning our official second language. It doesn't have to be immersion. We don't have Spanish immersion. We have Spanish bilingual. We have Mandarin bilingual. We have German bilingual. The only real immersion programs are French. And so they're not as effective as people think they are. They're effective at calling people out. They're effective at streaming. But we can have, and we should be teaching more teachers through the post-secondary education process to teach second language. Ideally French. And then it can reflect the needs of the community. So if at some point kids want to learn a third language, as they do in Finland, it can reflect the needs of their community. And that's where the community school can reflect the needs. Maybe it is Mandarin, maybe the third languages, but every child has access to language learning. I don't think, I mean, we're one of the richest nations in the world, in one of the richest provinces in the world. I don't think that that's asking too much. Very few countries outside of Canada don't teach children 2 languages. We just happen, because our first language is English, we don't really feel a need to learn a second language.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see a full. I would love to see full-on second language programming all the way through.
Yep.
Right, and far better, and actually, frankly, far better than we do now. Right, I took second language programming all the way to grade 10 before I dropped it, and it was only French, and it wasn't great, and I suck at it. I still suck at it. So it's not. It's like, but that wasn't French immersion. And yes, you could. I think it's fair to say that French immersion may not be having the intended effect across the board, because we don't do French immersion across the board.
Right. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, right?
Right. So, it's very limited schools, and you have to have, you have to have some sort of purpose in attending there, or you're either in the catchment for the school, or you have to have a reason for you're like joining the Francophonie board, or you have to have a reason for going there. Like, you already got
the rural-urban divide. I mean, we didn't even touch on that. And
we didn't even touch on that. That's crazy.
That's a whole other discussion about what rural kids across this province have access to and don't have access to. That's huge.
Yeah.
In the provincial, and this would go back to when you say why aren't school boards talking about, the province has a mandate to offer equitable and accessible quality programming to every student across this province. And that is not happening. It's not happening for any of these reasons. Whether you're talking about French immersion, whether you're talking about charter, whether you're talking about private, that is not happening. And the rural-urban divide is like a whole other conversation.
Yep, absolutely. And the way we handle that exact divide is we don't handle it well. At best, we don't handle it well.
At best, yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to get quickly the last question. I mean, you're right. We can get into the urban. There's a lot of other things that we can get into here, but we have lives, and I think that this is a really important conversation. But I want to ask about this term "gifted," and basically, I want to ask, in a sense, in this conversation around charter schools, because it feels to me like those that are wanting the charter school option is because they feel that their kid is gifted in some way, shape, or form. And as Barb mentioned, there is a marginalization to that for a number of different groups. But the other thing that it keeps ringing in is I'm not necessarily every kid out there, whether they have, and I think this connects in some ways to the behavioral issues that you were talking about, Barb, every kid has a strength. Like, we all have strengths. I mean, just, it's expressed differently. It's not like one kid is better than the other. Do we need to eliminate the word gifted and find some other way to bring out the strengths in everybody?
Well, I don't... Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Barb.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'll try to be quick. I just also don't know that we know that when a kid is 6 years old or 7 years old. My gifts have changed over the years, right? Like my first degree is in chemical engineering. I'm so far away from that now. So how much of this giftedness is the oversight of the parents, making sure their kids are proficient at something? And how much are we promoting kids to learn across these different and celebrating those differences and knowing that learning across them is beneficial and knowing that your gifts change as you grow? Where's the beauty in that? For me, I think that's lifelong learning, and there's some other type of education that isn't always just academic that happens in schools.
Mm. So, one of the children of my life, trying to be a little bit discreet about the whole thing, is absolutely gifted. I mean, just top of the class, top of the school district, bored, quite often bored, because they have no challenge whatsoever in the programming. So it's not like I'm saying my kid, I'm not being a blind parent. So from that perspective, where the child is not being challenged in the system, in the school that they're in, Is there a need for a gifted channel programming to take that child to the next level?
Here's the issue that I'll say that arises from that is that absolutely that child's needs need to be met, and they need to be met with proper resources available in the school, right? We need to bring in, educators and teachers' aides and child care workers, whether it's psychologists and sociologists, to help these children. But what I would say is that somewhere in there is also a child who has English as a second language, who's new to this country, who is also gifted, and no one will ever know, because the way his giftedness will manifest will be dismissed as behavioral issues, will be dismissed as English language problems, will be dismissed because of his or her poverty, the color of his or her skin, and without the proper resources in schools, some kids will have a disproportionate access to resources than other kids. And the giftedness is sort of the gateway, but we're still missing meeting children's needs, whether it's giftedness or Asperger's or autism or hearing impaired or any of those things. And so if we can meet the needs of their kids, that's what we need to do. Let's meet kids' needs. Whether they're gifted or music, let's meet their needs.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Barb. I would love that. I think it's important. We need to have these kids having all their needs met, and we want for example you used of a gifted child who has a language barrier or has a poverty barrier. We need people to catch that early on and get them directed into the right channels to support not only their basic needs but their expanded needs. Right? To take your example to the extreme, when a gifted child succeeds, let's say that a child with those barriers, their language barrier, economic background, new Canadian, or from a background of poverty. Success for them could just be being a normal kid, and that's not good enough. They're a gifted kid, but their gifted kids all just made them level with kind of the average child that's out there, as opposed to tying in with the recognized, certainly privileged from a background child who can then stream into an academic, gifted academic program. So I agree.
Yeah, and that's literally at the end of the day what we're saying. If we build the system around that kid, I guarantee that child in your life's needs will also be met. Mm-hmm. Because we've started it from that basic level.
I agree, but to circle back though, on charter schools, right? We're still talking. This is what it came down to, right? Yes. We're still talking about 13 schools. We're talking about a few thousand students, right? It's that's not fair. It's probably more than that. Probably 10, 12,000 students. Any rough idea how many?
According to FCACalgary.com, there's approximately 9,000 students back in 2013-14. Over 7,000 in Calgary. So we can at least say I think it's fair to say at least 10,000 students.
So, and I will say this, and I have said this before. The schools themselves and the programs themselves are not the problem. The problem is the impact and the illusion that they create. It's an illusion of exclusivity. It's an illusion that I'm doing something better for my kid than other people can do for their kid. So when we circle back to the child living in poverty, his parents who might not speak English, who won't have the money to ship their kid across the city to access the gifted school, who won't be able to fill out the 4-page application process or attend the interviews because they're busy working 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs. That is the effect. The effect is desensitizing us to widening inequity and desensitizing us to privatization through these barriers. That's the problem I have when we then have the nerve and the audacity to call that public education. It's not public education. Keep the charter schools if you want. Do it. Keep them outside of the public umbrella. Don't call them public. They exclude a large portion of Canadian and Albertan students.
I am absolutely fine with not calling them public. No problem.
Cool beans.
And roll them out of the public school mandate. No problem.
Cool beans. And defund them. They should get no public dollars either then.
That's a separate conversation. Right? Now you're running this whole, there's one taxpayer and there's one person paying the bill in the end, and that's the people, paying for it. And their money should follow the student.
No.
Which is, I think, a totally separate 2-hour conversation.
Absolutely.
We'll end up with disagreement.
Yes.
But I tell you, let's say we're going to end a disagreement, but
well, that means we have to have a second.
Barb makes valid points. Absolutely. Oh, I'm all fine for that. We'll have a second go with this.
It's like a cliffhanger.
Yes. We will have a part 2 of this discussion for sure.
Right.
But for both of you, tell us kind of what you're up to, what's going on, where we can follow you, etc.
We're Support Our Students, so www.supportourstudents.ca, SOS Alberta on Twitter. We are just constantly, trying to generate discussions, whether it's through podcasts, through op-eds, speaking engagements, social media, to get people talking and thinking about equity in education.
And you could find me not really on Facebook, because I keep that a little bit, I'm not around, but you can follow me on Twitter at Donoyeg, Donyeg, and if you like loud opinions on LGBTQ rights for children in Catholic schools and theater stuff and business intelligence and all these other weird interests that I have, you can follow me there. Just be prepared to be either bored or annoyed with how the stuff I post.
We're never bored, though. It's never boring.
It's never boring.
Of course, you can find me on Facebook, Kevin Olenick, Twitter, KEBOLE, Spreaker.com, KEBOLE, where you can hear all the podcasts. Subscribe on iTunes, Agree or Disagree the podcast, YouTube, Kevin Olenick, etc., etc. I think this was great. I think this was very valuable. I'm glad we finally did a debate like this. Thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was great.
Thank you very much for having us. And
thanks, Kevin.
It's a pleasure, Donald, to finally chat with you in person.
Exactly, right? It's great.
Yeah.
I'm nowhere near as bad as you thought I was.
Back at ya.
Back at ya. It's all good.
We will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.